Some might be surprised to learn that the fate of America's economy has already been determined, verified, and announced by the Obama White House. Yet, it has received scant attention from the corporate media. In 2011, economist Kyle Bass interviewed a senior member of the Obama administration about its planned solutions for fixing the U.S. economy and trade deficit. Among the questions he asked was about the U.S. exports and wages. But the question itself was not nearly as important as the response he received from the senior administration official. In fact, this single 7-word response clarifies everything, explains everything, and leaves little else to discuss. We're just going to kill the dollar. There it is, the entire agenda in one short sentence. It explains everything we've been seeing domestically and globally. That one statement makes every other question irrelevant, or otherwise answers all economic questions and explains everything. Nothing else matters.
Zek, duna me ndru. Zek, lemla Londrës, duna me ndru.
Only patient, don't hurry.
Okay, I'm talking to you. Okay, just wait.
The UN has strongly criticised Europe's handling of the growing migrant crisis, calling it ineffective. The numbers of desperate migrants heading to Europe has surged, and so far EU leaders have been unable to present a plan to tackle the crisis. The level of tension over the crisis was made clear by the burning down of a secondary school which had been allocated to house refugees just outside Berlin. Nobody was injured in that fire, which police say was started deliberately. And the alleged arson attack came amid the pro- and anti-migrant protests in Berlin. During the rally, several pro-migrant demonstrators were detained as they tried to confront nationalists from the Pegida group. RT's Lizzie Phelan went to the site of the alleged arson attack for us.
This is the school sports hall designated to house around 130 refugees that was gutted by fire overnight in Nauen, just outside the German capital, Berlin. Now, police have cordoned off this building and there's still firefighters working on the scene. So right now, this is as close as we can get to the damage. Now, the cause of the blaze is not yet known, but police say it may have been planned. Now, we've seen a series of anti-refugee rallies in Nauen, and this is the second fire at a refugee centre over just the last 2 days. And both these fires come after those very violent protests that we saw in Heidenau, just outside Dresden, on Saturday, where neo-Nazis protested outside a refugee home there and clashed with police, leaving several officers injured. The cause of this blaze still not known, but it will be taken by many as a message to the growing number of refugees that this is the kind of reception they can expect to receive upon their arrival to Germany. In Nauen, I'm Lizzie Phelan reporting for RT.
Now, to discuss this story in more depth, I'm joined live by Hugh Bronson, who's the Vice Chairman of the Alternative for Germany Party. Hugh, thanks for coming on RT. The violent anti-migrant protests that we've seen, how serious do you think the level of discontent is in Germany?
Well, let me first and foremost make absolutely clear that any violence used against people or objects is fundamentally wrong. My party, the Alternative for Germany, categorically condemns any use of violence against people. Don't blame the player, blame the game. And the blame lies wholly with the German political class, who shows no inclination whatsoever to enforce the law of the land. Just look at last year's figures. Out of 200,000 asylum seekers, only 7,500 were deported. Even the Prime Minister of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, asked the German authorities not to give so generously to asylum seekers coming from the Balkans.
What do you think is the problem here, though? Is it that Germany is being overrun and the general population have had enough of it? Or is it that the extremists are having their say loud and clear?
Well, I think the blame, as I said, lies with the political class. They are not doing enough to enforce the law of the land. The German Interior Minister, Lothar de Maizière, said Germany can handle 800,000 refugees, which is a number expected in 2015. This man is completely connected from reality. This is wishful thinking. 800,000 people, that is the German city of Frankfurt or the Russian city of Krasnodar on the Kuban River. Now imagine you had to find housing and social services and food and sanitation for 800,000 people when there is nothing in place. Anyone who believes that this is not a logistical and a humanitarian problem can't live in the real world. De Maizière lives in cloud cuckoo land.
Well, one of the solutions that's being mooted by some European officials is getting rid of the Schengen zone, getting rid of free movement around Europe. Do you think that that's the answer? And are things that serious?
I believe things are that serious. Schengen allows for open borders, no control at the borders, and we don't have any control of people coming into the country. Now, how can you control immigration if there is a migration of peoples underway? And this is the way we have to look at this. Africa is a growing continent, Europe is on continued decline, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. France and Denmark have temporarily suspended the Schengen Agreement and showed that it is perfectly legitimate if it is in their national interest. Now, why can't Germany, why can't other countries follow?
Now, you've mentioned you think that the country's leadership aren't doing enough, but this seems to be a problem throughout Europe, and countries are bickering. They're blaming each other for what is happening. What is the solution?
Well, I'm afraid there is no European unity on that question. Of course, we have Dublin agreements, 1, 2 and 3, and every country has to register the refugees coming to their country, and then the number of refugees will be allocated according to agreement.
Coffins of the 71 people found dead in a truck at the roadside yesterday. Maybe the only time they've been treated with dignity in weeks. 59 men, 8 women and 4 children. Amongst the bodies, a Syrian identity document.
We have confirmed that the insulating layer on the sides of the truck didn't allow any air to pass through. We could neither rule in or out whether they ensured that air came through the cooling system or the roof. I believe that most likely the people in this lorry suffocated.
The truck passed no border controls when it entered Austria from Hungary, because both countries are in the EU Schengen area.
I think the solution is not to make more border checks. I think the best solution is to find legal ways to Europe, because on the one side you can protect the refugees, and on the other side it's the best in the fight against the criminals.
This morning's scenes on the Libyan coast make that appear even less likely. Up to 200 people drowned from 2 boats trying to reach Italy. Death at sea, death in a refrigerated truck, coffins or body bags. It's primarily Eritreans and other Africans who set out from Libya, but Syrians were also amongst those rescued yesterday.
50 migrants arriving in the port of Palermo on Thursday. They were found below deck in a boat north of Libya on Wednesday by the Swedish Navy vessel Poseidon. The cause of death, the migrants had suffocated. According to officials from Frontex, the bodies were unloaded in refrigerated containers. Well, in other developments, the number of migrants found dead in an abandoned truck on Thursday has risen to more than 70. The vehicle was found near the Austrian village of Parndorf, about 30 kilometers from the Hungarian border. Police are carrying out autopsies to determine how the migrants died. Elsewhere, nearly 1,500 migrants were rescued by the Italian Coast Guard and European Navy ships on Thursday, the same day that Médecins Sans Frontières released this footage.
Please stay calm. It's very important to stay calm. We will rescue all of you.
The team picked up around 700 people in a number of operations on Wednesday. Here they can be seen saving a fishing vessel off the coast of Libya. There are currently around 150 women and 30 children on board Médecins Sans Frontières' Bourbon Agos. It expects to dock in Vibo Valencia in southern Italy on Friday.
Women first! Women first!
Migrants and refugees by the tens of thousands are braving the perilous journey across the Mediterranean. They're fleeing war and poverty in the Middle East, Africa and Asia, with the hope of reaching Europe and being granted asylum.
2,000 people crossed into the EU from Serbia on Monday alone. Up to 3,000 migrants arrive daily at the Greek-Macedonian border. Over 6,000 have been rescued in the Mediterranean Sea in
also sinking the boats that the migrants are travelling in. This was the policy of the EU unveiled in April of this year, was literally to sink, to try and sink the boats of the migrants that are fleeing. And it's important to remember what people are fleeing. You have to be very desperate to board one of these flimsy rafts across the Mediterranean or put yourself on a truck with no ventilation and so on. And they're fleeing wars. They're fleeing wars in Libya, in Syria, in Somalia. These are desperate people, mainly of the British government, official EU policy. That's the stage we're at in Europe.
And just to be clear to our viewers, talking about sinking the boats with the migrants aboard or taken off first?
Well, they claimed that they would have some sort of way of sinking the boats before migrants got onto them, but it's inevitable in any kind of military action. There are always going to be fatalities, and frankly, the mechanics of it are going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult for them to identify what are smuggling boats and what are not, because the situation on the ground is that it's often fishing boats that are used as fishing boats that will then sometimes do a voyage to take people out to the rafts, and they'll be transferred onto the rafts a few miles out from the coast and so on. So the reality is a messy policy, but the idea is to sink their boats, prevent them from leaving, force them to stay in those war-torn countries. And let's remember that Europe it was a major player in setting fire to the Middle East and setting fire to Libya and Syria and creating those wars in the first place.
So why aren't we hearing more? I asked this to our last guest. Why aren't we hearing more from the US about how to deal with this huge problem that Europe's got on its plate now?
Well, I don't know why you would necessarily. The US are quite happy, I think, with whatever the EU decides to do. These people are mainly not going to the US. The US sees it as a European problem. You know,
even though it was their interventions, okay, joined by Europe in many cases, but it was their interventions that kicked all this off in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely, it was, and Europe's kind of, you know, definitely created this problem in alliance with the US. But we shouldn't forget that for the war in Libya, which is one of the major causes of this refugee crisis, was the first statesman to call for that war openly was David Cameron, and initially Obama actually poured cold water on the idea of it. He had to be kind of arm twisted by other people in his own government and the Europeans before he actually did it.